Good afternoon and welcome to the SILA Foundation April webinar, Insurance Entity Licensing Best Practices. The purpose of the SILA Foundation is to provide an educational forum for the public in financial services, specifically insurance and securities. My name is Julie Mendel and I am the Education Trustee for the SILA Foundation. And before introducing today's panel, I have just a few housekeeping items. This webinar is 1 hour in length and is being recorded. Within the next week, you will receive a link to the recording and a post-webinar survey that we would really appreciate you completing. We ask that you mute your microphones and turn off your videos so the focus stays on our speakers. We also ask that you put your questions in the chat box. We will be monitoring and posing the questions to the speakers on your behalf, and we will answer as many of the questions as we can in the time we have available. Today, we have a panel of industry experts who will be discussing licensing best practices for entities, common issues with entity licensing requirements, and they're going to share some best practices and resources to help navigate entity licensing. Today's panelists are Danny Fields D'Amato, Compliance Officer and Vice President at Marsh McLennan Companies. Her focus is on licensing, core compliance policies, and professional standards adherence. She brings 18 years of compliance and process design experience to our discussion. Lonnie Eichner, the Director of Compliance at WebCE, has over 20 years of insurance industry experience. She holds a SILA Associate designation and is currently pursuing her SILA Fellow designation. She currently co-chairs the Southwest chapter of SILA. Leslie Gullidge is the Director of Licensing at USAA. She leads a team of over 30 professionals who support a full range of licensing operations that range from acquisition and maintenance of licenses and registrations for property and casualty and life and health insurance, securities, and mortgage lines of business, appointments, and agency affiliations. Nikki Brown is the Assistant Vice President and Manager of Licensing at Alliant Insurance Services. She has over 16 years of experience specializing in producer, adjuster, and entity licensing. She holds multiple industry designations, including the SILA Fellow, and serves as Secretary of the SILA Board of Directors and President of the SILA Foundation Board of Trustees. Tiffany Dunges is the State Education and Outreach Manager at NIPR. She is responsible for all aspects of education and training of state regulators on the functions of NIPR and state product licensing regulation. So please join me in welcoming Danny, Lonnie, Nikki, Leslie, and Tiffany to our virtual webinar stage.
Oh, next slide. I think you're on mute,
Danny. You might be on mute or we can't hear you.
How about that? Is that better?
There we go.
Yay. It was just a little technical difficulty there. Okay.
It's all right. I've done that a few times.
So right on cue, my dog will start barking. Well, welcome everybody. And we're going to just start off by talking a little bit about our organization, SILA, because some of you may not be members. You may work with others that are part of SILA, or you may not have heard of SILA. So it's the Securities and Insurance Licensing Association, and it's a nonprofit association for insurance, licensing, and securities registration compliance professionals. Our education and networking resources are second to none. They provide so many different forums and resources for us. Next slide, please. It's an awesome networking opportunity to join our organization. The membership benefits include forums and communities where you can ask questions in sort of real time and get feedback from industry experts. Idea sharing, you can enhance your expertise and network with peers, including our regulators, by the way, and our vendors. Attend annual education conference, which is a phenomenal opportunity this year. It's in New Orleans, Louisiana. And there are professional development opportunities. We have a wonderful designation program where you can really hone your expertise and learn. I'm going to quiet my dog down. Hopefully you all can't hear him. You can really hone your expertise in the industry. And you can, if you already feel that you're an expert, you can contribute by sharing your expertise. We have amazing industry curated resources as well as vendor provided resources that help us to stay abreast of all of the crazy regulatory changes and challenges. And of course, there's networking opportunities. Next slide, please. All right, and just a couple of our resources. There's regulatory updates that are sent by the organization and they're housed on the website. They have links to all the state websites, of course. There's a solution provider directory. That's what vendors are. Sorry, I was calling them by the wrong name. SILA Speaks podcast, which is a great podcast that we put out, I think, monthly. And there's a different guest speaker each time with interesting industry context. There's a career center for job opportunities within our industry. Next slide, please. And there's many other amazing reasons to join SILA. So that's a little more about our organization. If you have any questions at all, you can go to the website, which is SILA.org, and you can contact, that information will also be provided at the end of this presentation. So we can start talking about our business entity license requirements. And I think Lonnie's up next.
That's right. First, I'm going to just cover what the definition of business entity is according to the best practices handbook that SILA puts out. So the definition of a business entity is a corporation, association, partnership, limited liability company, limited liability partnership, or other legal entity. And business entities can be carriers, agencies, or individuals, as in a sole proprietorship, and have different licensing requirements than an individual producer would have. The PMLA does allow for states to have the option of requiring or not requiring entity licenses. And when a business entity does obtain a license for its primary office where required, it then has to determine the state requirements for its branch locations. Some of the states use different terminology. It could be a license, a registration, a notification. So actually, with these different requirements, it can cause a lot of confusion and frustration for those of us that work in licensing. So today, what we want to do is help to bring some clarity and share our experiences, as well as some valuable resources. Next slide, please. This is an example of one of the many resources that we have. This is the Agency Licensing Requirements Quick Guide, and it actually provides answers to the basic requirements by jurisdiction. And these are maintained by different subgroups in SILA. And this obviously was updated in January of 25. So they're maintained on a regular basis. Next slide, please. And here's one more. This is the DBA or assumed name. This is just another example of some of the resources. Next slide. So today we're going to focus on 4 common issues with entity requirements and kind of go through, based on experiences with our different organizations, how we handle these situations. The branch location requirements, the DRLP requirements, affiliation requirements, and appointment requirements. Nikki is going to start us off by talking about the branch location requirements.
Thank you, Lonnie. Next slide. All right. So the first thing I'm going to talk about today is branch licenses. If you know anything about our SILA website, we have an open forum out there, and there's been several conversation threads about branch licenses and sort of how each company handles them. So here's just some basic definitions of branch licenses. A branch license could be a physical location other than the business entity's primary license location that shares the same tax ID number, FEIN number. Each branch location may be required to obtain a separate license issued or a separate state issued license. So that is one thing that's required in a couple of states. Others require registrations or a branch office registration. So the physical locations other than the business entity's primary license location that are reported to the state and listed under the business entity's primary license. So it could be a registration, or the last one is a branch office notification. So physical locations other than the business entity's primary license location that are reported to the state and listed under the business entity's primary license. The notification requirement of a business entity's additional location may be optional to use a state-specific form or filing method and or require a filing fee. So as you can see, just from this here, there can be a lot of differences between the branch requirements in the states that require it. And I'm just going to do a high-level overview of some of the differences that you might see depending on the state. So let's go to the next slide, please. So approximately 13 states require a form of branch licensing and or notification to the state. I say approximately 13 because the one thing I did not take a look at was the territories. I know here at Alliant, we do have territory licensing, and that's, I call it a beast in itself, but there may be additional requirements in those territories. But as far as the 50 states in DC, there are 13 states that require them. As you can see, probably the biggest challenge, it would be a lack of uniformity. I think you're going to hear that theme kind of intertwined in everything everybody has to say, is that if it's a challenge, it's because there's a lack of uniformity from state to state. As you can see, some require notifications, other require additional licenses. Those additional licenses could have a completely different license number and have to be tracked individually. And some just require it to be listed. It just depends on the state. Two states that I want to call out because they are slightly different in terms of the branch requirement of notification is New Jersey and Nevada. These two states only require you to report branches that are within their state. So if you have a really large organization that may do business, may have office locations that write policies for both New Jersey and Nevada, but they're outside of New Jersey and Nevada, you wouldn't have to report those office locations. They're just simply looking for locations that are within their state. Washington and Georgia have really unique requirements as well. Like I mentioned earlier, we have a conversation forum or an open forum that's out on SILA's website. It's one of the many benefits of being a SILA member, is having those conversation forums that you can go out and talk about best practices. So just outside of even this hour-long presentation, you might run up against a challenge. I just recently posted one on DRLPs that I'm going to talk about here in a minute. But there's always industry members out there, or regulators, or service providers who are posting questions out there on challenges that we're having in the industry and how it is that we go about handling them. Washington and Georgia have been, I shouldn't say Washington, Georgia especially, has been a conversation that has been talked about a lot in the open forum, and about sort of their approach to branch licensing. So Georgia requires their regulator, which is one of the other unique things about SILA, is our relationship with our regulators. The regulator there in Georgia has been amazing at working with each individual business entity. I've sent over records from Alliant and saying, hey, here's all of our branch records. How can these be condensed down? Do we need all these branches? And she has been great about walking me through what needs to be surrendered and what doesn't. And essentially what Georgia focuses on, or at least what I could get from it, is they're concerned about where can they get insurance not license records, but insurance records, and where are they housed at. So you back up 15 years ago or 20 years ago, those branch locations had to be registered with Georgia. They had to have a license because people kept their individual records at the office, and the department wants to know where they can access those records. Well, fast forward 15 years later, right? We keep everything electronic these days. Everything is stored on servers, and in our one location, no matter where you're at, you can access those records. That environment and the way that the industry is handling records really changed the way that Georgia handles branch licensing. So for Alliant, what we had decided based on our conversation meeting with the Georgia regulator, her name's Melanie, we decided to have one primary location for our headquartered location in San Diego, California. And we have all the lines of authority on that license, and that is the only one that we maintain. So it really condensed down what we have for license records, and it's been really great. So it's a good move in the right direction. But I highly recommend that if you are running into that challenge with your business entities, that you reach out to Melanie and talk to her about that, because she is really great about walking you through that. With Washington just has a really unique set of laws. Jeff Boffman has been an amazing partner and regulator with SILA. If you don't know Jeff, it's very easy to know Jeff. He's a great guy, but he's been phenomenal to partner with when it comes to licensing challenges in Washington. And he will openly admit that Washington has very archaic rules, meaning they haven't really kind of caught up with where the industry is at. They're trying to work on it, but as we all know, there's legislative priorities, and sometimes licensing doesn't hit the top of the list. So with Washington, one of the things that we had to clarify in the last couple of years is that they have a system set up that you have sort of, you can have a resident or non-resident license. Resident license would be a location inside of Washington. A non-resident license would be anything outside of Washington. So just to give you an example of Alliant is headquartered in San Diego, California. So we have a non-resident Washington agency license, but we also have a location inside of Washington. And so we made the determination that based upon what Washington is saying, that you can have one license in each state wherever you are selling Washington business. And then if you have locations within that state, they also would be branch locations of that main license in the state. So for instance, with Alliant, we are headquartered in San Diego. San Diego is where we have our license, but we also have offices in Los Angeles, Irvine, and a number of other places in California. Those locations would then become branches of that main license. And we kind of switched things around and did it that way based upon Jeff's recommendations and what the Washington law says. And it also had dictated how we did our affiliations for our producers that are licensed in Washington and our non-resident producers that had, or I should say, our producers that have non-resident Washington licenses. So how we have ours organized is our non-resident licensed producers are affiliated with our San Diego office location, which is a non-resident license. All of our producers that are inside of Washington are then affiliated to our Washington licensed location in Washington, which I believe ours is in Seattle. I'm not totally sure, but I'm pretty sure it's in Seattle. So there's a lot of differences between those states. So what I wanted you to see from that with Washington and Georgia is that our relationships with our regulators are paramount to our success and our best practices in this industry. A couple of things that I see is that the future of branch licensing could very well change. The digital record storage and remote work has impacted how these regulations are enforced. There's been many conversations about how you can apply some of their regulations to like remote work scenarios or branches, or there's not a lot of brick and mortar locations like there used to be. A lot of them are closed because those folks are working from home. So I see probably a lot of movement happening within the next 10 years in this area of licensing. My hope is that it honestly just goes away, but I know that's way easier said than done. So and the last thing I want to say about branch licensing is like I mentioned, SILA offers great resources on these requirements. I think the next slide shows you one of our resources for branch licensing. So it's just yet another snippet of what our resources have to offer. I'm all the time telling my team, like, if they've got a question, have you checked for that resource out in the SILA, because they have a plethora of resources that can walk you through any different licensing scenario that you have. Next slide. Or Danny, Lonnie, Leslie, do you guys have anything you want to add for branch licensing?
Sure. So for branch licensing, it really can be sticky, as Nikki mentioned, but one of the things we always try to do is see if it's optional or required. We tend to not do things that are optional in our organization just because there's risk and expense involved in that, especially when it comes to something like a branch license. And, of course, we want to be cost conscious if we can. as long as we're still obeying regulation. In addition to that, I agree with Nikki. I really think that in the future, most branch licenses will go away because of the way records are stored, and the intention of having branch licenses is probably kind of a moot point at this time. And I'm going to put the regulators that we mentioned in the chat, like I'll put their contact information.
I think that's a great, because I just wanted to reiterate that what you said, Nikki and Danny, our relationship with our, regulators and our ability to reach out to them to gain clarity where we need it, and their willingness to do so for the industry is extremely important and helpful because of sometimes the lack of clarity and the changes in technology and practice, right? That then kind of make some of the requirements not quite make sense in the sense of how to, align with them, especially what you mentioned. I'll reiterate, right, where location of original books and records, right? And so, yeah, I think that's just wanted to reiterate that. I think that resonated with me as well as probably a lot of our participants today.
Agreed.
Okay. Well, we will move on to DRLP. I always get this backwards. I always say DRLP, but it's DRLP is the second thing that I wanted to talk about today. This stands for Designated Responsible Licensed Producer. It's also called a variety of different things in different states because just like branch licensing, it's a challenge because there's not a lot of uniformity in it. So this person is designated by the business entity to be responsible for the business entity's compliance with the insurance laws, rules, and regulations of the state. Next slide, please. So these are just some high-level bullet points on this. What I basically say is that a DRLP is essentially your primary point of contact with the Department of Insurance. They want an individual that they can get, a licensed individual that they can get a hold of for a variety of things. So that could be market conduct questions, that could be complaints. If a company is being issued many complaints by consumers, it could be a licensing question. It could be a variety of different questions. They want a representative that they can reach and contact when it comes to those kinds of matters. Generally speaking, the way that we handle that is that we select a senior member of that entity that is also an officer. In most cases, I should say, we will literally pull a list of folks that are associated with that entity and look at the senior members that are listed there. And then we just make recommendations back and forth. It is nothing formal, a lot of conversation back and forth, and then usually a casual email to that producer saying, hey, here's what this role is, and you cover all the requirements that we need for this role. Would you be interested? And then usually we get a yes for it. So it's your primary point of contact that that they would like to have, and that's what we consider a DRLP. As you can see, there's generally speaking, and this varies from state to state, but our general rule is that we have about a 30-day time frame to submit that change. So we receive termination reports here at Alliant. We're also notified. We have a good partnership with our HR department, and our HR department is aware of some of these folks that would be on these licenses. They usually will give us a heads up to let us know, hey, so-and-so is retiring or leaving Alliant. And that gives us a little bit of time to find a new individual. These folks also in our database are flagged so that our entire team of folks who handle the individual's licenses are aware that they are a DLRP, or they are an officer, or they are what we call a VIP, or a very important person. We have processes that we have built out that are for those people. And so part of that checklist is, are they a DLRP? Because we can't do an offboarding package until we have this transition complete. So we have a lot of stopgaps in place so that we can ensure that we can make this transition as seamless as possible within 30 days, give or take. Most of them can be done in 30 days. Some take a little bit longer depending on the uniqueness of the licensing that they have. Another challenge that we have is just, again, a lack of uniformity as far as the submission process is concerned. Tiffany's going to talk a little bit about the DLRP service that NIPR offers, which is like an awesome step in the right direction for the industry and making DLRP changes easy to do and seamless. But there's still a lot of work to be done as far as how these are submitted. Some states require forms, some states require an email, some states will allow you to do it through NIPR, some states will allow you to do it through CERCON. There's just a variety of ways that you can do it, which makes it just take more time because it's just not very efficient. The third bullet point is something that I actually put out on the forum a couple days ago because it was a requirement that I was talking to my team member about actually. And it said there are a handful of states that require the DLRP to be an officer. And so the question I put out there was, do individuals or do other entities require the officer to be a corporate officer on a corporate slate at the SOS level? Or could it just be somebody that has an officer title? So hopefully we'll get some more responses on that because it really got me thinking. I'm like, I haven't considered like just an officer title. Like I've always kind of been on the side of the fence where they had to be a corporate officer. But I was at a smaller company before I came here, and our company is much, much larger, and it's just much more difficult because we have a variety of different types of business that we offer, which also in turn means we have a lot of different lines of authority on our agency licenses. Sometimes our individuals, no matter which way we skin that cat, basically, they don't have all the lines of authority to match license. So we'll have multiple individuals on a license at times. And that can be really cumbersome when it comes to getting them added to a corporate slate, because that requires a whole bunch of corporate governance stuff that has to happen before they can be listed on a slate. So anyway, so that's just something that can make it challenging. Some states require the LOAs to match, like our lines of authority for the folks who, sorry, we're in the world of acronyms around here, and I forgot that some people may not know what LOAs are, but that stands for lines of authority. They may not match. So there's several states that require those to match. So then you're having to add lines of authority to people's licenses, or you're having to add multiple folks to fit the agency's license. The next one is the number of DLRPs. I would love the state to offer at least 2 DLRPs, but some states do not. Some states only allow for 1. This presents challenges when you're doing succession planning. So we work in an industry where you don't want to have a single point of failure. And yet you do sometimes with DLRPs, because you can't have more than 1 on the license, which then makes that transition a little bit more cumbersome when the time comes for your DLRP to step down or retire. Like I said, our general best practice is that we find somebody and select someone who oversees our agency's program. So our most senior level member of that entity is usually who we start with, and then we'll just work our way down from there. The next slide shows you yet another spreadsheet that a snippet of a resource that we offer. This is a fairly recent one. It was made within the last, I want to say, like 4 years or so, by one of our task groups. And it just kind of outlines exactly what the requirements are for a DRP or a DLRP change or DRLP change. So just a great resource to utilize if you are having to do one of those. We actually have 4 on the docket that we're doing right now, and this resource is going to come in really handy for that. So yeah, so that's really all I have to say about DRLPs. There's always challenges and things, problems that you can run into with them. And I think you will probably gather from Danny, Leslie, and even Lonnie that we all probably handle them a little bit differently.
And I think, like you can see from the chart and all of the, the comments and information that you provided, Nikki, is that just like any other area that we all deal with in the licensing world, there's a lot of variance between the states, and And the way that we can approach these requirements as companies, we at USAA make the choice or the decision, right, that our DRPs will be formal officers. And so for each, we go through that process of the board, the board action and activity. If we need to make someone who is licensed, right, in order to qualify to be in that DRLP position, an actual officer of the company, which then can add to the time frame, right? If we're in a position where we need to change or replace a DRLP, I would say that is really among the most challenging areas with DRLPs is the ability to quickly make a change, especially because we have so many states that don't allow you to have more than one DRLP. And you mentioned also the special handling flag, ensuring that you're flagging those DRLPs is important because of the individual licensing element that ties to the entity license in many states, right? So a DRLP losing their license for whatever reason, maybe they didn't complete their CE or something else happened, as can be the case with producers maintaining their licenses. Well, there's heightened risk there because in some states, the DRLP's license going down is going to have impact on the entity license. And so tracking and monitoring their licenses from that perspective is, I think, a big best practice that we all wanted to point out, right?
Absolutely. Some other challenges with DRLPs is that the person who is selected to be the DRLP may be kind of far removed from the business that's transacting. And from time to time, there'll be some regulatory challenge, and the state will write to that person and want a response from that DRLP, and they're completely out of the loop. So then they panic, of course, and they reach out to compliance. And then, of course, compliance and legal will help them respond. But it is a challenge making sort of this person who's just sort of there to animate the license in charge of something where they may be far removed from the actual transactions and processes. So it is a really good idea to try and choose a very senior person where that would be appropriate. In a really large organization, it's a challenge because, as Nikki and Leslie both pointed out, the many, many lines of authority that you may need to bring the corporation to life as far as licensing goes may not be held by somebody at a senior level or an appropriate level. So you have to sort of gather a bunch of employees that would be appropriate, tell them what the requirements are, make them understand, and then if you're allowed, put multiple people on a license. And another anomaly with agency licensing or business entity licensing is some don't even offer a license. Some jurisdictions don't have a license type line of authority issued to the firm. The lines of authority are based on the individuals.
Mhm.
So it's many challenges there. But
Right, right.
we also choose officers, a senior level officer, but they are not necessarily Secretary of State level board officers. They may
Mhm.
just be colleagues in our organization with an officer title
Mhm.
and the appropriate lines of authority.
Yes. And I love what you said too, Nikki, going back to where you said you meet with them and ask them if they're okay with being the DRLP. I, I laugh because, right, I think in our roles, leading and managing licensing for our organizations, part of the responsibility that falls to us is helping them to understand what is meant by, the responsibility of being identified in that role. And as Danny touched on as well, in really large organizations, it's not necessarily fully possible that they're going to have their hands personally around all of those processes and procedures and lines of business and things that are going on in a large organization. What they want to hear from me, right, from us, is that there are processes and procedures, there are controls, there are checks and balances, et cetera, in place that they can rely on as the DRLP. And then that helps them to be more comfortable with that with that position and that responsibility. So we don't so much ask as tell them why they should be okay with it.
Yeah, it is a lot to consider though. And also you want to consider that there are some, well, less these days, but there also are some signing requirements and such. So if it's somebody who's constantly
Mhm.
traveling and somebody who's
Mhm.
often unavailable, that's not the best choice.
Yep. We've had that challenge too. All right, well, I think we're gonna move on to agency affiliations with Leslie.
Agency affiliations. Actually, um, Mary Ellen, if you're running the slides, would you mind skipping ahead a couple? I think we might touch on appointments first, and then we'll circle back to affiliations. Thank you. So um, the this is an area that kind of touches on individuals, licensed producers as individuals, as well as our business entities, both of which may require company appointments. So a transaction, as you see on the slide, it's a transaction that's tracked by each of the state departments of insurance, most of them with the exception of a couple of states. It's initiated by the insurance company, and it's the method by which the insurance company declares an individual or an agency to be authorized to transact insurance business on behalf of that insurer. So basically, it's establishing that business relationship between the insurance company or carrier and the individuals who are transacting business on its behalf. So next slide. So appointment requirements. So you got a licensed producer, right? This producer is licensed, but can they sell on behalf of your business entity? So we, especially amongst, I think, our individuals and individual producers, especially in our area at USAA, we have mostly a model of captive employee agents and a direct sales model. As opposed to independent agents who can be appointed with multiple carriers and insurance companies in order to sell the products of all of those carriers. But an individual insurance producer may not act as an agent of an insurer unless they become appointed as an agent of that insurer. And you will see in parentheses, we pointed out that's in almost all states. There are a couple of states who are non-appointing states or who do not require company appointments. Business entities, insurance carriers must file a notice of appointment with states who require it within each state's prescribed time frame. So that's going to vary from state to state. And that also touches on the element of just in time appointing, which we all as the panel kind of laughed a bit about. That's just in time appointing is a topic area that we think deserves its entire own webinar. But just to touch on that, right? The prescribed time frame in which to appoint an agent varies from state to state, and in many states, with the exception of some, and which states those are where those exceptions exist to just-in-time appointing, will allow a carrier to appoint an agent within a certain number of days after a certain trigger, right? So within a certain number of days of the business being sold, right? The policy being sold, et cetera. So that is another challenge, right, in this area to be aware of, knowledgeable about, and have processes for determining as the carrier what your trigger is going to be for that appointment. But as we mentioned, right, the carrier must appoint agents whom it authorizes to solicit, negotiate, and sell its insurance products. So what about the business entity, right? I mentioned we talked about individual insurance producers being appointed, but also an agency insurance producer also may not act as an agent of an insurer unless it becomes an appointed agent of that insurer. And that is in many states, as I noted, not all. And appointing, one thing we wanted to point out and touch on is that appointing the agency business entity in some states, its affiliated producers may then solicit for the carrier. So we'll touch on that a little more in the next slides when we go to affiliations. But the one method of handling creating that business relationship between the individuals who are selling the carrier's products and the carrier is that appointment. But in some states, there is the ability to appoint the agency, and then any individuals who are affiliated to that agency then also have that ability to sell through the agency appointment. So again, variances between, between the states, variances around just-in-time appointing. I would say that we wanted to point out that some of the, in addition to that, some of the big challenges and around appointments is the non-filing states and how you handle those as a company. So by non-filing states, I mean that there are some states who require carriers to maintain a list of their appointed agents, although there is no formal or actual transaction that the carrier is required to submit to the state that notifies the state of who that appointed agent is. However, you do have to maintain and update the appointment data for those states. And one of the best practice that I will share is treating those states as much as possible the same in your record keeping as the states that do require an appointment transaction or an actual formal notification to them of the appointment. So if possible, write an automated build of the data record utilizing perhaps the same transaction trigger that you would use for a formal transaction or notification of appointment to the states that do require it. But you just don't want to lose sight of those states, right? That while they may not require a transaction, do expect you to have a list of your appointed agents that you would be required to produce to them upon request. Another element of appointments is what happens to an appointment if a license goes down. And this is another area where there's challenges, right, in the sense of lack of uniformity. Some states will terminate the appointment automatically if the license goes down. Others will not. So then that requires awareness, right, of the need to reappoint an agent upon license reinstatement. Lack of uniformity in the appointment effective date, I think, is another area to have awareness of and processes in place to deal with. It can vary from the date the appointment was processed by the state to the date indicated by the carrier on the appointment transaction to the date that it was submitted by the state, right? So there's variance in the what's considered to be the effective date of the appointment. I mentioned just-in-time appointing. I wanted to touch briefly on the existence of adjuster appointments for those of us on the call who manage adjuster licenses. There are a couple of states that require appointments for adjusters. We at USAA are handling staff adjusters, so we appoint our adjusters in Florida and New Mexico. There can be some other variants among independent adjuster and adjusting firms, but wanted to at least touch on the fact that appointments do exist as well in the adjuster space. So anything, Nikki, Danny, that you all wanted to add around the appointment space?
I think in the interest of time, I'm gonna go ahead and let you talk about affiliations.
Okay, let's jump to affiliations. So as a segue, I had mentioned about agency affiliations and mention that there is some ability in some states to appoint agencies and how agency affiliations come into play there. And agency affiliation is another method by which the agency notifies the states of a business relationship between the agency and individuals. Next slide, please. So an agency affiliation, like the appointment, so insurance companies must appoint individuals or agencies. A business entity and agency must file a notice of affiliation with states who require it to identify individuals who are working on behalf of their insurance agency. So those requiring affiliation can include licensed producers who are employees or conducting business on behalf of the agency. The DRLP, as we had covered DRLPs before, can be required to be affiliated to that agency. And there are other individuals who can have requirement to be affiliated, such as an owner with a 10% or more interest or voting interest, partner, officer, directors, et cetera, or other key agency personnel. And the way that that relationship is established with the agency is through the filing of an affiliation with those states who require affiliations. And then I wanted to touch on that if your agency is appointed by the carrier, does that appointment include the agency's affiliated producers? Some states will allow this in lieu of direct carrier appointments, but the majority of states do require individuals to have their own appointments. Quickly, some of the major challenges, and I think I already saw a couple of comments in the chat around affiliations, just in the lack of uniformity around who must be affiliated, varying from only the DRLP to, maybe every agent employed or selling insurance products under an agreement with the agency. So a lot of variation there. But I would say in the affiliation space, probably the main challenge is that there is not a single source of data or ability to file affiliations. Affiliation data is maintained at state level. So unlike what we're used to for those of us who are in the industry with appointments and the ability to electronically appoint and through electronic transactions, you're going to find, each affiliation has to be filed with each state in the method or platform that that state individually utilizes. So there's also as well on the back end, not a single source of data in order to be able to identify who are all of your agents affiliated to your agency in one data source. You're going to have to go to each state source individually, right, in order to be able to find that information. So just monitoring status and maintaining data integrity becomes a real challenge around maintaining and tracking agency affiliation status. Anything, Nikki and Danny, you all wanted to add there?
I just will comment and say that I think just like branch licensing, I can see this area of the industry changing over the years. It already has shifted a little bit with a few states no longer requiring affiliations. I think the industry speaks loud enough saying they wished it would all go away. But unfortunately, there's some states that's a big amount of revenue for them, and they have legislation and laws that are in place that make it difficult to get rid of it. But yeah, I mean, Leslie, I think you covered it well in the sense that there really is no one stop shop to doing affiliations. Our team has 3 individuals who we break up by alphabet, by last name. They handle a chunk of it, and then they just know which states need to be affiliated. And we have just a task monitoring process to ensure those affiliations are processed and disaffiliations are processed.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
We try to just affiliate where it's required by statute. So if it's optional, we tend not to do that again because there's risk and expense involved in creating the affiliation and then also processing the termination timely. And in addition to that, you mentioned the challenge of not having a single source of truth for the affiliations, which I think is probably the biggest industry pain point. If
Yes.
this was some sort of transaction that flowed through an IPR, or if it was present on the PDB, it would be helpful. But just for the industry members that may not be aware, it's not an unwillingness by an IPR or states to help. It's just that the states all think of the affiliation itself differently. They call them different things. Some of them call them endorsements. Some of them call them
Exactly.
sub-licensee. There was a few that called it an appointment for a little while. Sometimes they get reported to the PDB in a
Mhm.
different way by the state. We've had a lot of cases of accidental affiliations through the uniform application, right? So we file an
Mhm.
individual
Oh,
license
good point.
transaction and fill out the affiliation section of the transaction. With good intention, we possibly could be affiliating where intended. For instance, in Maine, that usually works, right? But then we unintentionally affiliated in states that never even required an affiliation. So we wouldn't have even been seeking to cancel those or terminate those affiliations later in those states because we don't typically affiliate there. We found them by accident when we're doing agency renewals. So
Right.
there are many, many challenges, and that's why having a forum like SILA and the agency carrier subgroup within SILA, it's a really great place to talk about those issues and try and get the state's ear, so that they can understand our pain points
Mhm.
and hopefully just make better processes, even if their laws require them to keep the affiliations, which is fine. If they can just make the process of checking and balancing these
Mhm.
requirements easier, that would be so helpful. So,
Exactly.
so
Good
everybody get
points, Danny.
involved.
Appreciate it. Yeah, on behalf of everyone on the call, I'll just let you know that I literally make a robocall to NIPR on a periodic basis to push that point.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks to SILA for this opportunity for NIPR to provide an update today. On the next slide, I will go over the items that I will cover. I will cover the states that are in production through NIPR for contact change requests, or what we call CCR, for the business entities. I'll talk about the demographic or primary name updates and the DRLP updates. Plus, I will include those states who are we are actively working to implement. So on the next slide, on the contact change request for business entities, we started this implementation in the first quarter of 2021 and have 38 states in production today. Ohio will be going live very soon and bringing our totals up to 39. We are actively working with Puerto Rico and South Dakota. On the next slide, I want to talk about the demographic updates. The primary name changes went live in October of 2022 for individuals and business entities. The licensee name changes can be submitted anytime outside of the application process. We have 35 states live for individuals and 28 states live for business entities. As you can see, those asterisks are marked for those states that are for individuals only. And we are actively working with Puerto Rico and South Dakota. For the DRLP updates, we went live in August of 2023. We have 27 states that are live and in production. And the update is for license specific and at the license level. DRLPs can be updated and submitted anytime again outside of that application process. And again, we are working actively with Puerto Rico and South Dakota. So here is a look at my NIPR page. Once a business entity has logged into my NIPR, the 3 credentialing products will display if the business entity has a record on the producer database. And so once you click on that, you'll be able to go through the application. And if you have any questions when you're in my NIPR, please reach out to us at nipr.com, contact us, and our customer experience team will assist you. So with that, I want to thank you for your time, and I'll turn it back over to Julie. Thank you.
Okay, we do have just a couple of questions. Someone did ask if the presentation will be available. There will be a PDF of the presentation available with the link to the recording, so watch for that. A question, is there any indication that entity affiliations will become easier to add and remove or standardize among states through NIPR or Vertifor, et cetera? Don't know if you can answer that.
Had the opportunity to talk with some representatives from NIPR here in the last couple of days about it, and I will say that there is no indication of that.
Right.
Next question is, does
Thank you.
DRLP who does not sell need to be appointed to renew their license?
Julie, can you
I'm
repeat that?
sorry.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, tell me again.
Does DRLP who does not sell need to be appointed to renew their license?
I think it's dependent upon if that appointment's required with the state. I mean,
Exactly.
you
Right.
hold a license in a state that requires your license to be appointed, then yes, it doesn't matter what they do or if they sell or if they don't. If they have a license in that state, they have to be appointed.
Right. So like New York and Florida come to mind. Those would require, if it's an agent license, you'd have to have an appointment in order to renew that license. Although
Exactly. So
Florida
the
doesn't
trigger
renew.
there, yeah, the trigger there isn't their DRLP status. It's whether or not they need an appointment at the state in order to maintain their license.
Last one is there a list of broker states where the producer can represent the insured and appointment is not required?
I don't think there's a specific list for that.
Yeah, I don't know if we have that in a resource since most of the states now call it a producer license, but I know there are some states that are truly an agent state versus a broker state. And we deal with this a lot. Marcia is a broker. And so a lot of times we get into these very heated carrier discussions with, do we really need an appointment? Of course, they might still need to onboard somebody and let them go through the process of background checks and stuff, but do they need an official appointment in some cases, especially if they're New York based and they're a broker, then no. But I don't know if there's a resource. We'll have to look through our resources and check with Linda Burnett, see if we have something. We'll get back to you on that one.
Okay, and there were several comments I noticed that different members of our panel today did address on, are there certain resources? So I just emphasize again that those resources are all available on the website, and go ahead and play around. You're not going to break anything. Go ahead and click on it, see what it says. So with that, we are really close to being exactly on time. So great job for having 5 speakers today. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise on insurance entity licensing, providing us with some of the best practices and the resources. And especially thank you for being a friend to SILA and the SILA Foundation. We appreciate all of you and your time this afternoon. As a reminder, our webinars are free of charge and open to the public. Sharing your invitations is welcomed and appreciated. Watch for and complete the post-webinar survey and plan to join us next month for a presentation on basic finance.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a nice
you.
day.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Bye.